You are on an errand you perform frequently. Your destination doesn't matter. A grocery store or large shopping center, but the architecture isn't new. It's at least 40 years old, perhaps even older. There's a sense of urban decay in history, and the sidewalk you're traveling on is cracked and in need of repair as you move past other travelers at a moderate pace. The sky is overcast, obscuring the sun, and the wind is unfriendly, scattering debris and papers across your path. With a slight shudder, you wrap your coat around yourself more tightly and press forward until, greatly relieved, you finally reach your desired location. You place your hand firmly on the door to enter, and then hesitate. You could have sworn that this door wasn't there previously, and it seems out of place with the rest of the building. Still, you want to achieve your goal and return home quickly. So you shake off your feeling of unease and step through. The door closes with a soft click behind you, which sounds more like a lock being secured than anything. Inside, you're met with an interior that is completely alien to the one familiar to you. Walls of monochromatic, sickly yellow. The faint smell of moist carpet and buzzing, fluorescent lights. The room is devoid of furniture. However, you can see an adjacent room which looks exactly like the first. Confused, you turn around and attempt egress, only to find that the door you came through has been replaced by the same sickly yellow wallpaper. The overhead halogens flicker, and you hear just the faintest sound of something up ahead. It sounds like the wailing of a lost soul, but it's so faint, it may be nothing at all. You have found your way into the back rooms. Greetings, friends. It's been far too long. I know the weather is ghastly and the roads are treacherous, but I'm so glad you could join us this evening. Have a drink. Warm yourself by the fire. Let's discuss real and genuine tales of terror, the strange and bizarre, myths and legends, haunted histories and ghost sightings, cursed objects, cryptids and UFO abductions, secret societies, the occult, and dark conspiracy. Let's discuss all of these things. But first, please have a seat in the haunted chair. A trend on the internet for many years has been the sharing of photographs of what has been termed liminal spaces, or locations which are on transition between two states of being. Usually these are abandoned and empty areas, an almost vacant, crumbling mall, or a school hallway during summer. These spaces also usually elicit a sense of unease, the surreal, or even a feeling that is entirely impossible to quantify, and has given birth to urban legends, the most popular of which is a realm called the backrooms, an alternate reality in which an unfortunate traveler finds themselves trapped in an endless maze of seemingly endless rooms and hallways. While the actual existence of the backrooms can be debated, there exist many similar stories regarding time slips, alternate realities, and disappearances, and we will touch on them in this episode. For anyone that camps or hikes on a regular basis, the woods can often yield up weird phenomena, even beyond strange entities and vanishings without a trace. One particularly odd reported phenomena are stairs that seem to have been erected in the middle of nowhere, have a destination of nowhere, and are the epicenter of paranormal activity. These have been particularly reported within the confines of national parks in the United States, and according to these accounts, these structures are found in the middle of the wilderness, within a vacant field, or often near a body of water, with no other signs of an edifice. The top of the stairs will usually end abruptly, and they are built of a variety of materials, inclusive of stone, iron, brick, wood, or steel. They can either appear as though the ruins of some ancient civilization or some entirely new construction. The stories became so widely reported that they inspired the third season of the spine-chilling horror anthology Channel Zero. We will take a first step up in investigating this phenomena during this episode. The old photo album was found amid the dusty contents of an abandoned living room. You open to the first page. An utterly deserted, calm Venice canal by night, the moon shimmering slightly on dark waters. The second, a perspective of an empty Times Square during the coronavirus epidemic. The third, the deserted hallways of an indoor movie theater at 3 a.m. The word liminal is derived from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold. Liminality was originally defined as being on the threshold of a new life stage, or used to describe periods of ambiguity during rites of passage, such as the bar or bat mitzvah, or coming-of-age rituals that many tribes enact. It was subsequently adopted as a term to make sense of sociopolitical upheaval and the problems wrought by globalization. More recently, liminality has been used to describe physical spaces that, due to their function and characteristics, are transitional in nature. Examples include parking lots, rest stops, hallways, and waiting rooms, and these areas often evoke unique feelings of apprehension, eeriness, or nostalgia when presented out of context, or their function as intermediary points between one place and another. The human mind dictates that these locations are intended to be teeming with movement and life. Therefore, the absence of such activity creates an otherworldly atmosphere and an overall sense that something is wrong. Since 2019, users on social platforms such as 4chan, Reddit, and Tumblr began using the word to describe images that inculcate both unease and nostalgia. But people differ on what makes a true liminal space. The subreddit rules for liminal spaces are as follows. Liminal doesn't mean creepy, nor does surreal, or any sense of nostalgia too personal to be understood by anyone else. Still, others deem this definition incorrect and categorize these spaces as very subjective, often linking early childhood memories and personal aesthetics to the definition, with the usage of playgrounds, vacant houses, abandoned malls, or roadside attractions. A nostalgic appeal and dreamlike tone may lead some, particularly millennial Z generations, to reflect on the passage of time and yearn for the optimism and innocence of childhood. Despite differences in definition, liminal spaces are often eerie, induce anxiety, but are also somehow comforting to certain people. With the state of world events set so precariously, they appear to be the perfect metaphor for being on the brink, or perhaps even offering an uncanny, post-apocalyptic vision of a world without us. On a still deeper level, they may symbolize the collective stasis and helplessness that many feel when it appears that systems of public health, labor, and politics are broken and little can be done to change our course. A vacant architectural space could represent the false promises of modernity or the excessive emphasis placed on materialism. The concept could also serve to warn us of the more mundane dangers of occupying such spaces alone, coming from nefarious human elements, and another reason why we react viscerally to the images. But could the concept also serve another psychological purpose in warding against the possibility of supernatural danger? Most of the episodes of missing time, time slips, or mysterious disappearances have one thing in common. They occurred in the areas of the lost, the lonely, and the liminal. Disappearances, either modern or historical, are not uncommon. with an estimated 10 million people reported missing every year in the U.S. alone. Approximately 95% of those reported return or are accounted for, leaving a remaining 5%, some of which are due to kidnapping, abduction, or being a victim of another crime. However, there remains a small percentage for which there is no seemingly logical explanation, and a rare percentage of those accounts actually come back to relate their experiences. The following article, titled Charles Ashmore's Trail, was first published in the San Francisco Examiner October 14, 1888. The family of Christian Ashmore consisted of his wife, his mother, 2 grown daughters, and a son of 16 years. They lived in Troy, New York, were well-to-do, respectable persons, and had many friends, some of whom, reading these lines, will doubtless learn for the first time of the extraordinary fate of the young man. From Troy, the Ashmores moved in 1871 or 1872 to Richmond, Indiana, and a year or two later to the vicinity of Quincy, Illinois, where Mr. Ashmore bought a farm and lived on it. At some little distance from the farmhouse was a spring with a constant flow of clear, cold water, whence the family derived its supply for domestic use at all seasons. On the evening of the 9th of November in 1878, at about 9 o'clock, young Charles Ashmore left the family circle about the hearth, took a tin bucket, and started toward the spring. As he did not return, the family became uneasy, and going to the door by which he had left the house, his father called without receiving an answer. He then lighted a lantern, and with the eldest daughter, Martha, who insisted on accompanying him, went in search. A light snow had fallen, obliterating the path, but making the young man's trail conspicuous. Each footprint was plainly defined. After going little more than halfway, perhaps 75 yards, the father, who was in advance, halted, and elevating his lantern stood peering intently into the darkness ahead. "What's the matter, Father?" the girl asked. This was the matter. The trail of the young man had abruptly ended, and all beyond was smooth, unbroken snow. The last footprints were as conspicuous as any in the line. The very nail marks were distinctly visible. Mr. Ashmore looked upward, shading his eyes with his hat held between them and the lantern. The stars were shining. There was not a cloud in the sky. He was denied the explanation, which had suggested itself, doubtful as it would have been, a new snowfall with a limit so plainly defined. Taking a wide circuit round the ultimate tracks so as to leave them undisturbed for further examination, the man proceeded to the spring, the girl following, weak and terrified. Neither had spoken a word of what both had observed. The spring was covered with ice, hours old. Returning to the house, they noted the appearance of the snow on both sides of the trail its entire length. No tracks led away from it. The morning light showed nothing more. Smooth, spotless, unbroken, the shallow snow lay everywhere. 4 days later, the grief-stricken mother herself went to the spring for water. She came back and related that in passing the spot where the footprints had ended, she had heard the voice of her son and had been eagerly calling to him, wandering about the place, as she had fancied the voice to be now in one direction, now in another, until she was exhausted with fatigue and emotion. Questioned as to what the voice had said, she was unable to tell, yet averred that the words were perfectly distinct. In a moment, the entire family was at the place, but nothing was heard, and the voice was believed to be a hallucination caused by the mother's great anxiety and her disordered nerve. But for months afterward, at irregular intervals of a few days, the voice was heard by several members of the family and by others. All declared it unmistakably the voice of Charles Ashmore. All agreed that it seemed to come from a great distance, faintly, yet with entire distinctness of articulation. Yet none could determine its direction, nor repeat its words. The intervals of silence grew longer and longer, the voice fainter and fainter, and by midsummer it was heard no more. If anybody knows the fate of Charles Ashmore, it is probably his mother. She is dead. The previous story was penned by the enigmatic author Ambrose Bierce, no doubt with full knowledge that people would take the story as fact. Taking into account his other well-known works, it was obvious that he was fascinated by mysterious disappearances and was particularly attracted to the theories of the German researcher Dr. Herrn Lipsig. Dr. Lipsig speculated that there exist certain holes in reality in which animate and inanimate objects may fall into the invisible world and be seen and heard no more. In this state, the victim would be in some sort of limbo and cease to exist, yet still exist at the same time. Bierce concluded that these holes were one of the causes of cases where people simply, spontaneously vanished. He would elaborate. But let us suppose that cavities exist in this otherwise universal medium, as caverns exist in the earth or cells in Swiss cheese. In such a cavity, there would be absolutely nothing. It would be such a vacuum as cannot be artificially produced, for if we pump the air from a receiver, there remains the luminiferous ether. Through one of these cavities, light could not pass, for there would be nothing to bear it. Sound could not come from it, nothing could be felt in it. It would not have a single one of the conditions necessary to the action of any of our senses. In such a void, in short, nothing whatever could occur. A man enclosed in such a closet could neither see nor be seen, neither hear nor be heard, neither feel nor be felt, neither live nor die, for both life and death are processes which can take place only when there is force, and in empty space no force could exist. Bierce's macabre fascinations with vanishings, a penchant for writing about them, and even joking that he would one day himself disappear, proved to be prophetic, as he did indeed vanish in 1913. At the age of 70, he took it upon himself to retrace the steps he had taken during his days in the Civil War, and then traveled to Mexico to see the battles of the counter-revolutionary forces of Carranza and Villa against the federal troops of President Huerta, at which point he planned to travel around South America. As to why he wished to see the Mexican Revolution, he once told a reporter, "I'm on my way to Mexico because I like the game. I like fighting. I want to see it." Bierce toured his old battlegrounds in the United States until early October of 1913, but after that his fate is in question. He wrote a last letter to his niece from Laredo, Texas on December 6, 1913, stating that he was about to cross the border to travel to Juarez. There was one final postcard on December 26 from Chihuahua, Mexico, at which point he vanished off the face of the earth. There was a rumor that he had died in battle in January of 1914 at Ojinaga, or that he had succumbed to a firing squad, or was murdered by none other than the infamous Mexican revolutionary General Pancho Villa himself. But perhaps he did indeed fall victim to the very unexplained phenomenon of which he became so obsessed. Perhaps he fell through that hole in between realities, which seems oddly fitting, and one can't help but think that he would be pleased by the mystery that has come to surround his disappearance. One of the most interesting historical accounts involved the crew of the Mary Celeste, an American ship found adrift near the Azores near Portugal in 1872. The 282-ton brigantine fought inclement weather for 2 weeks to reach the Azores with 7 crewmen and Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah, and the couple's 2-year-old daughter Sophia. The ship's last log entry was recorded at 5 a.m. on November 25th. The ship was discovered adrift by Captain David Morehouse of the British ship Dei Gratia, and it had left New York City 8 days before and should have arrived in Genoa, Italy. After sending a boarding party to the ship, it was discovered that the ship's charts had been tossed around, and the crewmen's belongings were still in their quarters. A 6-month supply of food and water was found, and the cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was largely undamaged. However, there was 3.5 feet of water found in the lower areas. It had been 10 days since the last log entry, and the captain's navigation gear and ship documents were missing. What occurred to the 10 occupants of the Mary Celeste? Speculation has ranged from sea monsters, killer waterspouts, mutiny, or pirates, but no plausible story has yet been forthcoming. The case even inspired Arthur Conan Doyle's 1884 short story, centering on the sabotage by a vengeful ex-slave, and Bela Lugosi was featured in a 1935 movie as a homicidal sailor. Treachery was the prevailing theory during the 1872 salvage inquiry, and while it is possible due to the fact that both captains stood to gain from the salvage, no evidence was found. Both captains were friends, and Briggs was a well-respected seaman, so this seems unlikely. Nothing appears to have been stolen, so piracy could be ruled out, and if it was mutiny, why would Briggs' crew abandon the ship after seizing control? Still another possibility is the evacuation due to alcohol fume explosion. However, evidence for this is lacking as well. Another explored possibility is that researchers found that the Mary Celeste was 120 miles west of where Briggs thought he was, possibly due to a faulty chronometer, and this, combined with the bad weather, may have caused him to be disoriented. Finally, and perhaps most logically, a ship's pump may have been clogged with coal and sawdust from a previous voyage, and without the pump, Briggs wouldn't have been able to tell how much seawater had leaked into the hull, thus ordering the ship abandoned while he still had the chance to reach land. Too much time has passed, and perhaps we will never know what occurred. In November of 1884, the reclaimed Mary Celeste was sailed into a reef just off the coast of Haiti by a captain attempting to scam an insurance company, and the ghost ship was ultimately lost to mystery. On June 14, 1969, during a camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains, Dennis Lloyd Martin vanished without a trace. There were no clues, not a piece of clothing, footprint, or other evidence to indicate where the boy might have gone. On Father's Day, it was a tradition for the Martin family to go camping in the national park. William Martin, the father, and Clyde, his grandfather, along with 2 other boys, began at Cades Cove and hiked to Russell Field. After camping there overnight, they moved to Spence Field, where they encountered another family with young boys, curiously also named Martin. Dennis was wearing a bright red shirt, and during late afternoon, he and his friends were playing hide and seek. They decided to find unusual hiding spots, appearing from behind bushes to perform a sneak attack, but not too far from the eye of their parents. Dennis was overdue for the same scare, and when this never occurred, his father became worried and decided to go look for him. William Martin ran back up the trail toward Russell Field, hoping Dennis had become disoriented and gone in the wrong direction. The others combed the area, and Clyde eventually hiked out to the park ranger station, not arriving until after 9 p.m. A huge storm had by then arrived with massive rainfall, dropping overnight temperatures in the 50s. By the next day, the search was sabotaged by dense fog and 2.5 inches of rain. However, the search response grew into a party of Boy Scouts, National Guard members, multiple rescue units, and 71 Green Berets who had been stationed near western North Carolina. And then the helicopters arrived. The combination of weather, along with the massive response of searchers tramping over the wet and muddy ground, may have proved to be a fatal mistake, as any scent or clue that lingered after the tremendous rain was quickly lost. Danny's 7th birthday came and went that week. A series of footprints was found that were boy-sized, of someone wearing Oxford shoes resembling the ones that Dennis wore. with the other foot bare. In addition, there was a solitary sock and shoe found. However, it is unclear if the shoe was the right type or size, or if it correctly corresponded with the footprints. Weeks later, an odd report was submitted to authorities from a family from Carthage, Tennessee. When Harold Key learned of the search for Dennis weeks later, he contacted officials to report hearing a scream and a figure running through the woods. At the time, Key's son thought the figure was a bear, but later they agreed it was a disheveled man hiding in the bushes. This account was discounted by officials due to the timeline and distance provided by Key. However, it hasn't stopped speculation by some of the existence of a tribe of feral humans camped in the vicinity that have lived in the wild so long that they are closer to beast than man. While Dennis's father did maintain he believed it was a kidnapping, the existence of feral humans seems unlikely. Still, another possibility is that Dennis was attacked by a wild animal, as snakes, bears, bobcats, and feral pigs all roam the woods in that area. However, had this occurred, it seems likely that searchers would have found at least a few scraps of that bright red shirt. Several years after Dennis went missing, a group of ginseng poachers came across the remains of a boy that had been scattered by scavengers not too far from where Dennis went missing. Not wishing to do jail time, they kept their mouths shut for years until one member told one of the original searchers what they had found. Another search party was gathered, but nothing was found subsequently. It has now been more than 50 years since the original case, and it seems that there will never be a resolution or closure for the boy who vanished into thin air. What other possibilities could exist for mysterious disappearances? There are those that claim that if the conditions are correct or incorrect based on your view, it's possible to experience a glitch in the simulation, or more commonly referred to as a time slip, in which many people have found themselves shifted either forward or backward in time, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. They maintain they are clearly in the same village, city, or area, yet in another time period, and often interact with those in the past or future. Many time slip participants report the same emotional or physical experiences. They feel depressed or flat, and there is an unnatural silence surrounding them like a bubble. Often they feel pushed by invisible groups of people. One morning in autumn 1957, 3 soldiers in training walked into the village of Kersey. One of the soldiers, William Lang, was a keen observer of the countryside, and he was certain that the grass and the trees changed to a color not matching that specific time of year. As they approached the village from the countryside, they could see and hear the bells of the church tower ringing. But as they approached within 100 yards, the bells promptly ceased, and there was an unnatural silence. There wasn't a single breath of wind or a bird call, and the houses looked extremely ancient, not exhibiting any TV aerials, telegraph wires, street lamps, or people. A group of white ducks congregated at a nearby stream. However, according to Lang, they were so quiet and lifeless as to appear almost decoys. As the soldiers progressed, they witnessed no sign of habitation or life, except in what appeared to be a butcher's shop. Inside, there were 3 skinned ox carcasses, surrounded by cobwebs and green with rot. As they peered over a bridge crossing the stream, the sense of unearthly sadness transformed to a sense of absolute evil, as though they were surrounded by unseen hostile watchers. After approximately 25 minutes in the village of the damned, they ran swiftly away, and upon reaching a sufficient distance, could hear the church bells once more and see smoke rising from the chimneys. Modern images indicate that the church simply could not have disappeared from view, indicating that the soldiers may have slipped back sometime before the 12th century when it was first built. There have been an unusual amount of reported time slips in the area of Suffolk and Liverpool. According to one account, on Saturday, July 7, 1996, an off-duty policeman named Frank had plans to go to Dillon's bookshop to meet his wife, but on his way he was nearly hit by a 1950-style van with Kaplans on the side. The driver sounded the horn, and Frank realized he was in a traffic area, whereas in 1996 that section of Bold Street would have been converted for pedestrians. Frank noticed that across the road, Dillon's had turned into crypts, and passers-by were dressed in the style of the 1940s or 1950s. He followed a girl in modern clothing into the shop, and as he did so, the shop turned back into Dillon's. Subsequently, when the story was related on a radio show, people called in to confirm that Dillon's had been crypts in the 50s, and that there was a local Kaplan's firm there also. Author Jenny Randall relates in her book Time Storms that in 1973, a 21-year-old man named Paul was driving home from a dance at around 2 a.m. He was passing through the English Midlands village of Little Houghton. He knew he had a long drive home and had drunk very little, but just after passing the church clock he lost all sense of time, finding himself on foot at Bromham, several miles away. His car was gone, he was soaked to the bone, and it was now 7 a.m. His car was found in a muddy field near Turvey, approximately 15 minutes from Houghton, and the gate into the field was locked. There were no tire tracks in the mud. Conceivably, it could be argued that Paul merely had a blackout. However, the location of the car and absence of any accident made it difficult to sensibly explain. Additionally, similar experiences have been reported, and another man named Paul Rainbow experienced similar missing time in 1988, which involved sudden motorcycle failure and the appearance of an egg-shaped white glow in an adjacent field. It appears that in both cases, each witness traveled forward in time. British actor Alan Helm was working in a theater in Brantford in 1959, and before his performances he liked to take walks out on the moors that were the inspiration for Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. He had performed the same walk many times over the past 4 years, and on that day he had reached the ruin called Top Withens by lunchtime. He then observed a man in a deerstalker hat with a shotgun who promptly disappeared. Upon looking for the man, Helm found himself peering down the hill at a huge Georgian farmhouse. He ran down the hill, knocked on the door, and looked into the windows to see a table set for lunch. There was the acrid smell of pigs, and he could hear cattle in the distance. Gazing back up the hill toward Top Withens, he found that it had vanished. The deerstalker man briefly appeared again, and now, frightened to his core, Helm ran all the way back to Hayworth. He checked his watch and found that it had stopped at 1:45 p.m. However, upon checking it again, just before the curtain came up on his performance, found that it was telling the right time. The area of Top Withens is remote, to say the least, and the ruin is the only building in sight. Janet Board, author of many books relating to strange occurrences, tells of an experience that took place in the early 1920s. She states, "A boy and a girl living in Flackton, Arkansas, walked through the silent town one Sunday afternoon when everybody was at the baseball game and took a shortcut to the ground through a pine wood. Anne and Robbie came upon a stream they had never seen before, and after crossing it, were presented with a completely different countryside, devoid of the knobby pines, scrubby undergrowth, and chattering sparrows. Accompanying the strange silence was a sort of dream-like haze that fell upon the two as they walked hand in hand. The vegetation had a different appearance, and the ferns were dozens of times larger than the ones they usually observed in local bogs. On reaching a small rise, they were able to observe the ball diamond as well as their friends in the distance. However, the voices sounded hollow and faint. Robbie and Anne watched the game until it ended, recrossing the unfamiliar stream, and when they looked back, the dream realm had vanished. Another encounter in Suffolk involves Miss Ruth Wynne, a teacher who in October of 1926 began walking to the next village of Bradfield, St. George, accompanied by a female pupil. Upon approaching the area of the Bradfield Church, they came upon the imposing wrought iron gates and high walls of an extravagant Georgian house. The building was mostly obscured by tall trees. Upon repeating their walk the next spring, they found that the grand house had completely vanished, and both reported their experience to the Labour MP, Sir Ernest Bennett. Again, in June of 1912, a young boy by the name of James Cobalt was assisting the Rougham butcher named George Waylett with his deliveries by pony and trap, and as they drove along Kinshall Street, the air turned icy. There was a loud whooshing sound. The pony reared up in terror and threw Waylett from the cart. For mere seconds, there appeared a 3-storied Georgian house with elaborate flower beds and gardens, before being completely obscured by mist, at which point it vanished. Waylett scrambled up and yelled, "That bloody house! That's about the 3rd time I've seen that happen." Eleanor Jourdain and Charlotte Ann Moberly visited Versailles on August 10, 1901, and later recalled how, as they were approaching a wood on the grounds, everything suddenly looked unnatural, the trees flat and lifeless, like a wood worked in tapestry. Continuing on their way, they passed a man with the dress and demeanor of an 18th or 19th century gentleman. He greeted them politely, but informed them that they were forbidden to pass through this section, and seemed to appear out of thin air. They believed they had been witness to a haunting, and subsequently found that the 10th of August, 1792, was the day Versailles had been sacked during the Revolution. Jourdain came back for another visit on the 2nd of January, 1902, and just after crossing a bridge was taken aback at the same feeling of smothering unreality. After again seeing people in old-fashioned clothing, she heard the sound of silk dresses rustle behind her, but turned and saw no one. Although alone, a few moments later she felt people rushing past her from behind, and heard the distinct words, "Monsieur et Madame," near her ear. A band was playing faintly just ahead, and when she later inquired, found that the band had played on New Year's Day, but not on the 2nd. Perhaps the palace and the surrounding grounds are still occupied by members of a royal court from long ago. Martin Turner and Anthony Jackson were in the fields of Havera Park near Ripley on the evening of June 28, 1812, when Turner suddenly shouted to Jackson, "What a quantity of beasts!" Jackson looked down to witness what appeared to be a group of soldiers in white uniforms, commanded by a figure in scarlet attire. He exclaimed, "Lord bless us, they are not beasts, they are men." The various formations marched past about 100 yards away, at which point they witnessed a second army in dark uniforms behind the first. There was apparently no hostility. However, when both passed over the far side of a nearby hill, there was a burst of what appeared as smoke, enough to obscure nearby livestock for nearly 2 minutes. Turner later stated he could see the arms of the first army gleaming in the setting sun. Are the explanations for these experiences ghost sightings, time slips, or something else? 17th century witnesses also believed that time slips were often the work of fairies or witches. A 1635 account relates the story of a man riding home by a hill called Black Down near Taunton, where he suddenly saw on the side of the hill a large group gathered, apparently assembled for a country fair. He was able to see peddlers, shoemakers, pewterers, and all kinds of fruit, trinkets, and drinking booths. However, he realized it was the wrong time of year for such a fair. Upon approaching the gathering, he could discern nothing at all, only seemed to be crowded and thrust, as when one passes through a throng of people. All the rest became invisible to him, until he came at a little distance, and then it appeared to him again, as at first. He found himself in pain, and so hastened home, where being arrived, a lameness seized him all on one side, which continued on him as long as he lived, which was many years. While the sudden lameness appears to mimic the symptoms of a stroke, this seems similar to previous tales in the experience of the invisible crowds and the unreality. Well, it seems that the rain has abated for now, and the road should be safe to travel. If you must go, please promise to visit us again soon. Stay in touch with us for frequent updates, more real tales of the supernatural and horrifying, and the chance for you, dear listener, to possibly own a piece of paranormal history. Till we meet again, we will save you a seat in the haunted chair.